Right now, we are here outside the home of Brian Laundrie's parents. We can tell you ever since that body was found, there has been a very heavy police presence outside the home here.
The case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie has literally captured the attention of the world. Everyone wants to know how this case ends after Brian Laundrie returns to his Florida home without his fiance Gabby after a cross-country road trip. Things came to a screeching halt in the investigation after the remains of Brian Laundrie were found. Brian was most likely the answer to all of Gabby's parents' questions about the death of their daughter. So how have they taken to the shocking news? The suspicious story of Brian and Gabby took America and the world by storm. People got involved. The police got involved. Random strangers on the internet were trying to look for clues, trying to find out exactly what happened to Gabby Petito. Of course, the first person that fingers were pointed at were none other than Brian. He was the last person she was with. They had been together all summer alone in their van, and suddenly he returns home without her, and he didn't say a thing about it. There were so many questions that had to be answered. Was Gabby alive? And if she was, where was she? Why did Brian return without her? It was hard not to point the finger at Brian when nothing seemed to add up. The police were trying to put clues together, all while the world watched, and some people on social media did the same. 2 days after Gabby was reported missing, Brian suddenly disappeared from his parents' home, and they claimed to not know where he was going or where he was staying. That's when the full-on manhunt began, as the police finally named him as the person of interest in Gabby's disappearance. 4 days after that, on September 17th, Brian was now declared missing, making the story that much more difficult. While the police were searching for him and trying to put the missing pieces together, body camera footage surfaced from when the two were in Utah. A Good Samaritan called the police when they saw Gabby and Brian in what seemed to be a domestic altercation. According to the officers on scene, it was more of a disorderly conduct situation rather than a domestic one. Gabby and Brian claimed that they had only had a little fight that was caused by a mental health break. They had been together in the van for so long and it was getting to them, and they were still happily in love. It wasn't a big deal. Although Gabby looked a bit distraught on the body camera video on one of the officers, the police deemed that everything was fine and no one wanted to press charges. They left the couple to continue their road trip in their van, and that was the last time Gabby was truly seen alive. While the search continued for both Brian and Gabby, there was still hope that Gabby was still alive, and hopefully they would be able to find Brian too. Social media was highly invested in the search for Gabby, hoping that by some chance she would be alive and well. YouTubers Jen and Kyle Batoon, better known as Red, White, and Batoon on YouTube, came forward that while editing a video from Grand Teton National Park's Spread Creek's dispersed camping area, the two noticed that the van that Gabby and Brian had been driving cross-country was in the shot, making the connection that they had accidentally filmed Gabby and Brian's van on August 27th. They turned the footage over to the FBI in hopes that it would help them with their search to find Gabby. Authorities expanded their search to the park in Wyoming, hoping that they would find some sort of clue, or even Gabby. It turned out that the YouTube clip had been extremely helpful, as they did find something, but it wasn't what the world was hoping for: human remains. After some testing to confirm the DNA, it was announced that the remains were in fact Gabby's. Naturally, Gabby's parents, Joe Petito and Nicole Schmidt, were distraught that after everything and the long search for their daughter, in hopes that she was still alive, were now crushed. According to reports, Gabby died by strangulation and had been left in the Wyoming wilderness for days. Even though Gabby was finally found, there were still so many questions to be answered. What led up to her death? Why did it happen? And better yet, who did this to her? Of course, all the fingers were still pointed right at Brian Laundrie, as he was the last one who was with her before she died. The only problem? Brian was still missing. Law enforcement now focused on trying to find Brian alive so that they could hopefully get the answers that they wanted and needed. But unfortunately, on October 20th, skeletal remains were found in Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park in Florida. After further DNA testing and having to use dental records, it was determined that the remains belonged to Brian Laundrie. Like Gabby, Brian's remains were also autopsied to try and determine his cause of death. Unfortunately, the autopsy results came back inconclusive. Now that both Gabby and Brian have been found, where does that leave the Petito family? Although we don't have hard, concrete, for sure evidence proving that Brian killed his fiance, it really sure seems like he did. Can they finally have some sort of closure? What do they think about the law enforcement finding his remains? The family did make an official statement through their attorneys, saying Gabby's family is not doing interviews or making a statement at this time. They are grieving the loss of their beautiful daughter. Gabby's family will make a statement at the appropriate time and when they are emotionally ready. It's a lot for Gabby's parents to deal with because not only do they lose a daughter, but they will also never find some sort of closure. The closest person to Gabby before her death was Brian. If anyone knows what happened or did something to her, it was most likely Brian. Now that he's dead, well, they will never find the answers to the questions they're so desperately looking for. Things are a little more complicated on Brian's family's end. While he's at the center of this whole investigation, his parents are also facing a lot of scrutiny. Like Gabby's family, they didn't issue a formal statement. Instead, having their attorney issue one on their behalf, saying Chris and Roberta Laundrie have been informed that the remains found yesterday in the ravine are indeed Brian's. We have no further comment at this time, and we ask that you respect the Laundries' privacy at this time. When it comes down to it, both sets of parents lost their child, and both are left without a lot of answers as to what happened. Brian's parents are wrapped up in the mess that he left them with, and Gabby's parents are still looking for justice to be served. Unfortunately for Gabby's parents, many could argue that justice wasn't served. According to one of Gabby's friends, Alyssa Chen, finding Brian's body wasn't necessarily a good thing for Gabby's family. It's really the worst possible outcome, she said. We will never know exactly what he did, and we'll never know why. We'll have these questions for the rest of our lives. Death is one thing, but is that enough justice for Gabby's parents? Not to mention, there are still so many questions that are left unanswered, with the person closest to Gabby before her death also found dead. Instead of dwelling on all that, Gabby's parents are more focused on making an example for domestic violence out of their daughter. They want to use their story and current platform to bring the issue of domestic violence to light. Gabby's parents decided to keep her memory alive by creating the Gabby Petito Foundation, which raises awareness of. Their mission is to address the needs of organizations who support locating missing persons and to provide aid to organizations who assist victims of situations. The Gabby Petito Foundation has already had its very first fundraising event, which took place in Long Island, Gabby's hometown, where there was plenty of food, live music, and an auction to help raise money for the foundation. All in all, they managed to raise over $13,000, and they were able to celebrate the life of Gabby, all while doing something for a good cause. Gabby's parents didn't attend the event, but were happy with how it turned out, as they simply wanted to take the awful death of their daughter and make something good out of it if it will help others. No parent should have to go through the traumatic experience of losing a child, and Gabby's parents, and Brian's to an extent too, will never get the closure of finding out what exactly happened to their children. Losing a child is awful, and having to go through it with the entire world watching doesn't make things any better for them. With all of the information we have so far laid out on the table, what do you think? Will Gabby's parents ever get the information they want or have their questions answered? Or will they live forever wondering what exactly happened to their daughter? Will justice ever truly be served with both Brian and Gabby being dead? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.